Okay, let's dive into something I know you've been curious about. We're looking at some source material today, specifically some bits from a YouTube video transcript. It's an expert talking about print on demand, and it really hits on this, fundamental question: why do some brand new POD stores actually manage to, well, find their footing, start making sales? Sometimes it seems out of nowhere, while others that maybe look like they're doing all the same things just kind of fall flat.
Yeah, it's a really common frustration, isn't it? You see the success stories, you put in the effort, and if it doesn't, immediately click, it's easy to feel like you're missing some big secret.
Yeah.
But this source material doesn't really suggest one big secret. It's more that consistent failure for beginners. It often comes down to a set of predictable, avoidable mistakes.
Exactly. And this expert, they identify 7 really big ones that, based on their experience, can pretty much guarantee a new POD venture just won't work out.
Mhm.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack these insights from the source. We'll lay out these 7 pitfalls clearly, understand why they're problems, so that you, listening, have a clearer map, sort of what to watch out for on your own journey.
Yeah, it's really about building that awareness around the potential traps.
Right. Okay, so let's just jump straight into the first big one the expert flags up. Not creating designs that fill a gap in the market. What does the source actually mean by filling a market gap? And why is that step, so critical?
Well, the source explains it as basically creating a product people actually want,
Hmm.
but one that either doesn't exist yet or maybe it's just really hard to find. And it's particularly crucial when you're starting out, right? Because you don't have reviews, you don't have that established trust with customers yet. You need something compelling enough in the product itself to make someone, overcome that hesitation. Take a chance on a totally new store.
That makes perfect sense. If I don't know anything about you, why buy unless you have something I absolutely can't get anywhere else?
The source uses a really striking example here. This Etsy store they found called Muggy McMuggins.
Yes. And what's fascinating about that one is how, well, unprofessional the store looked by sort of conventional standards. The source describes it as basically empty, no other products listed, 0 reviews, minimal branding, like none of the usual welcome banners or blurbs. Objectively, you'd think it should fail instantly.
But it didn't. That's the surprising part. This store got 20 sales, and they all came from just that one single mug.
Right. And the expert's analysis was, okay, the design was funny, sure, but the real driver, it filled a specific market gap. They actually searched on Etsy for that particular joke, that phrase on a mug. And according to the source, they couldn't find any others. None. Wow. So what this tells us is, even with all those disadvantages, brand new store looks rough around the edges, that originality. If it directly meets an unmet demand, it can be powerful enough to actually drive sales. The customer who wanted that specific joke on a mug had to go to Muggy McMuggins. That's a pretty strong pull.
Exactly. It creates this unique pull factor. And this idea, it leads directly into the second mistake, which is kind of the opposite approach, really, creating copycat stores.
Okay, so instead of finding a gap, this is like seeing what's popular and just making your own version. Like the source mentions seeing loads of dog dad mugs selling well on Etsy and just thinking, oh, I'll add one too.
Right. And the source is pretty blunt here. They basically say this often results in a, quote, boring, unoriginal design that just flops. I mean, think about it. If you search for something popular like Dog Dad mug, you instantly see hundreds, maybe thousands of options.
Yeah, and tons of those are from stores that have been around for ages, right? With thousands of sales, thousands of reviews.
Precisely. And as the source points out, if you're a customer looking for that Dog Dad mug, why would you pick the brand new store with 0 reviews when you see a store right next to it, offering something similar but with, tons of reviews and sales? The established store just has that social proof, that perceived reliability.
It really shines a light back on that Muggy McMuggins example again, doesn't it? If you want a generic Dog Dad mug, you've got endless choice. You'll probably go with the safe, reviewed option. But if you want that specific, unique design, you might just take that chance on the new store because it's the only place to get what you really want. That choice only really exists when the product is original.
It really underscores how tough it is to stand out in a crowded market with something that's, well, unoriginal. And to be fair, the source does acknowledge that coming up with genuinely original ideas, that's hard work, which is exactly why copying feels so tempting. It seems like the easier path,
Yeah.
but it rarely works out long term.
Which brings us neatly to mistake number 3. This ties into finding your niche, I think. Selling popular products instead of products where you have an unfair advantage. It's like chasing trends versus leveraging what you actually know.
Yes, exactly. The source talks about beginners seeing something like say the dog niche, or maybe a specific product like a custom pet blanket.
Yeah.
And they hear it's made hundreds of thousands of dollars and they think, right, that's where the money is. I need to make that.
But the problem is, as the expert points out, the people jumping into these odd niches often don't have any real personal connection to it. Like they might not even own a dog, or they aren't, super passionate about pets. They're just chasing the perceived profit.
And this is where that concept of an unfair advantage becomes really crucial. The expert says their own best product ideas. They come from being a customer within a niche themselves. They think, okay, I'm someone who loves X or Y. What product would I want to buy that I just can't find anywhere?
Right. That perspective makes brainstorming feel so much more, authentic and targeted. You're basically creating something for an audience you understand deeply because you are that audience. The source uses the sports niche as an example of where they don't have an advantage.
Right. And not because sports products aren't profitable, they probably are, but because the expert admits they don't play or follow sports. So they acknowledge they'd be at a huge disadvantage trying to dream up original, desirable sports stuff compared to a genuine sports fan, someone who inherently knows the culture, the inside jokes, what merchandise is maybe missing from the market.
So the big takeaway here feels like your personal interests, your experiences, they aren't just hobbies. They can actually be powerful business assets. Focusing on niches you're genuinely part of gives you an edge, right? In spotting those valuable product gaps that others who are just trend chasing might completely miss.
Absolutely. It's all about leveraging your existing knowledge base. Now, let's shift gears a bit to something that feels, a bit counterintuitive. Mistake number 4. Hurting sales by pricing products too low.
Okay, this really goes against what I think a lot of beginners assume, that they need the lowest price to attract anyone, especially when they're new.
It totally does. And the source acknowledges that's a super common beginner mindset. It often leads to pricing stuff so low they're just breaking even or maybe even losing money. But they argue, surprisingly, that pricing too low can actually backfire. It can hurt your sales. They even mention cases where stores increased their prices and actually saw sales go up.
That seems completely backward. Why on earth would charging more make people buy?
It taps into this cognitive shortcut we all use. It's called the price-quality heuristic. Basically, if something costs more, a brain often just automatically assumes it must be better quality. The source mentions a study that illustrates this perfectly, the denomination effect one, with chocolate. Remember that?
Oh yeah, I think I do remember reading about that. Participants got the exact same chocolate, right? But some were told it was expensive, others were told it was cheap, and the ones who thought it was expensive rated it as tasting better, and were willing to pay more for it later, even though it was identical chocolate.
Exactly. The researchers, deliberately misled them just to show how powerful that price assumption is.
Wow. Okay.
It just shows how strongly price influences how we perceive value and quality. So the expert's recommendation isn't necessarily to price super high, but to look at what your competitors are charging and aim for a middle ground pricing strategy.
So not the absolute cheapest, definitely not the most expensive, but somewhere in the middle.
Yes. Apparently, it plays into another psychological thing called the anchoring effect. People see the highest prices and the lowest prices, and they kind of perceive that middle ground as a safe balance. Like, you feel you're not getting ripped off with the highest price, but you're also, hopefully, not getting a poor quality product that might be implied by the very lowest price. The source really warns against being at either extreme compared to your competition.
That's a really practical tip, actually, and grounded in psychology, which is interesting. Okay, now let's flip this idea of price and quality. Let's look at the supply side. This leads us to mistake number 5, assuming more expensive print-on-demand products or providers are better.
Right, exactly. This bias, this assumption, it can also creep into choosing who will actually print and ship your products for you.
Right.
The source shares a specific test they ran. They ordered T-shirts from 2 different Printify providers, Fulfill Engine and Monster Digital. And these are the exact same design file for both. A ramen bowl image, I think it was.
Okay, direct head-to-head test. So what were the results? How did they compare?
Well, the quality difference was apparently quite significant. Monster Digital's print quality was much better. The colors were closer to the original design file, and the ramen bowl image wasn't sort of washed out like it was on the one from Fulfill Engine.
Okay, so Monster Digital clearly had the better quality print in that specific comparison. Now, here's the key question then, based on the mistake we're talking about. Which one cost more?
And this is the kicker, the surprising part that really highlights the mistake. Monster Digital, the one with the superior print quality in their test, was actually cheaper. The source quotes Monster Digital at around $11 per shirt, while Fulfill Engine was about $14.
Wow. So in that specific real-world test, higher price absolutely did not equal higher quality. That completely busts the assumption mentioned in the mistake, doesn't it?
It really drives the point home. You just cannot assume that a higher price from a POD provider automatically means you'll get a better product. So the source's recommended approach, instead of just relying on price, check the reviews. They even note that in this case, the public Printify ratings, I think Fulfill Engine was 8 out of 10, Monster Digital 9.2 out of 10. Those ratings actually lined up pretty well with the quality difference they saw in their own test.
Okay.
So yeah, user reviews seem to be a much more reliable indicator than just price alone.
Reviews over price. Got it. Makes sense. Okay, let's pivot now to getting your products actually seen by people. Mistake number 6 sounds like a big one for beginners. Using paid traffic in advertising before using free traffic in advertising.
Yeah, and the expert isn't saying paid ads never work. They even mention a personal success story, turning like $25 of Etsy ads into $142 in sales. So it can work, but they issue a really strong warning. For beginners, paid ads are often a very, very quick way to just burn through money.
Why is that such a risk, though? Especially early on. Aren't ads supposed to, get you sales?
They are, potentially. But the core issue, according to the source, is that it's incredibly difficult, even for experienced sellers, to predict which products are actually going to be hits. Think about big companies like McDonald's or Lego. They spend millions, literally millions, on market research, testing, focus groups. Before they ever launch a new product nationwide, they try to de-risk it as much as possible. Small businesses, individuals doing POD, we just don't have those kinds of resources.
Right. So without that expensive upfront testing, what's the beginner's reality then?
The reality is you basically have to do your product testing in the market, live. The source shares data from their own store experiment, and it showed a really high product flop rate. Get this, 62% of the products they listed got 0 sales. None. And a huge chunk, 65% of their total sales, came from just their top 25 designs.
Wow, think about that. Most designs you create statistically probably aren't going to sell.
Exactly. Which is precisely why running paid ads right out of the gate is such a massive gamble. You're literally spending money to promote products that are, statistically speaking, very likely to be flops anyway. You're paying for clicks or impressions on something the market ultimately doesn't want.
Okay, so the recommended strategy then is use free methods first.
Yeah.
To essentially use free traffic as your low-risk market research.
Precisely that. Use free methods, maybe SEO on Etsy, maybe social media, maybe Pinterest, to drive traffic and see which of your designs actually get clicks, get favorites, and crucially, get sales organically. The source gives a great example. The Big Four accountant Instagram account. They just post niche memes, stuff related to accounting and office life. And they have a link in their bio that drives traffic to their POD store selling related merch.
And creating niche memes, growing an account like that can often be done without spending money on ads, right?
Yeah, right. It takes time. It takes effort, consistency for sure. But it's a free way to build an audience and test which product ideas resonate. So the strategies is use these free methods first to identify which specific products are actually winning with the market. Then you take the earnings from those proven winners and you reinvest that money into paid ads, specifically to scale up those designs that you know people want. It's definitely slower than just throwing money at ads from day one, but it's a much more financially sustainable way to build traction, especially if you don't have a big pot of cash just sitting there for ad testing.
That makes so much sense. It's about letting the market validate your product before you invest heavily in promoting it. Smart. And finally, mistake number 7, which perhaps kind of underpins all of this, expecting overnight success.
Ah, yes. This is probably the most common expectation that leads to, well, discouragement and people quitting. So many beginners seem to hope they'll see significant results within, I don't know, a few weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months.
But the expert shares their own direct experience with the new store experiment. They stated it took them 6 months. 6 months to get what they personally considered serious traction.
And they present that as a much more realistic time frame. I mean, think back to that high product flop rate we just talked about. Finding those winning designs, it just takes time. The expert mentioned adding hundreds of designs to their store just to find those 25 or so that generated most of the sales. Building a successful store, especially if you're doing it in your spare time alongside other commitments, it's a process. It's about consistently creating, listing, testing, analyzing what works and maybe more importantly what doesn't, and then adapting based on that data.
Yeah, it's not like you just launch a store, put your feet up, and wait for the sales alert chime to start going off constantly. You're actively working, iterating, trying to find those few designs that will actually connect with customers.
Exactly. The source uses a nice analogy, actually. Building a snowball. It starts small, right? Maybe a few designs get listed, maybe you get a few early sales, small snowball. But as you keep adding, refining, finding those designs that really resonate with people, the momentum builds. Those winning products start getting more sales, maybe they get some good reviews, they start appearing higher in search results, and the store grows steadily over time, like rolling that snowball until it becomes a snowman. Patience and persistence through that iterative testing and building phase, they're absolutely essential.
Okay, so just to recap then. Avoiding these 7 common mistakes. Neglecting market gaps, being a copycat, ignoring your unique advantages or unfair advantages, underpricing your work. Also, wrongly assuming higher price means better quality from suppliers, relying only on paid ads right at the start and expecting instant results. These are the key areas the source really identifies as, well, almost guaranteed paths to beginner failure in print on demand.
Yeah, and understanding these isn't just about, avoiding failure. It's really about transforming those potential stumbling blocks into actual actionable insights. Insights that can guide you toward building a much more sustainable, hopefully successful business.
It really feels like recognizing these common pitfalls is a critical shortcut, doesn't it? In navigating what can feel like a pretty overwhelming landscape sometimes. Just knowing what not to do helps clarify the path forward, maybe.
Absolutely. If you can focus your energy away from these common traps, you significantly increase your chances of actually finding that path to success.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, especially that data from the expert, showing even they had most designs fail, and they needed to list hundreds just to find the winners, and that it took months to really gain traction. It brings up kind of an interesting final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given that successful entrepreneurship, at least in this context, seems to be much more about systematic testing, learning, adapting, rather than having that one perfect idea from day one, how does that challenge the sort of often romanticized view of entrepreneurship, the one that needs that single flash of genius right at the start? And what does it really say about the value of just starting, learning as you go, and adjusting based on that real world feedback you get? Something to chew on.